Hey, welcome to Friday, another Talk Money with Tom show today. I'm really excited you could come today. We are going to be off next week, so we're really going to try to help as much as we can this week. We've got a situation where we're trying in this show to help people improve their retirement and have more successful retirement. Whether they're in retirement already or looking forward to retirement, I think the things that we cover should help both groups actually. And so our format here, I generally have a little summary that we start with to talk about what's going on with the market, and then we get into kind of questions and answers. So you can send in the questions here to ask Tom at talkmoneywithtom.com, address you see right here on the picture, and then there's a chat box if you want to put in questions there. You can send your questions in at any time. We get those during the week also, and we cover questions that we think are important that have come from strategy sessions that we think everybody should hear about as far as that goes too. So really enjoy doing this. We believe that education in retirement planning, investment planning, and tax planning are really important to having a more successful retirement. And that's what this show's about. So if you'd like to continue to get the content that we put out on this channel, you can subscribe, hit the little bell. And if you really want to, you can talk to us also, set up a half-hour phone or a video appointment with Ethan and I, and we can talk to you about your specific situation and see what we might be able to do to help you, on a custom basis. So look forward to that. Really enjoy the show. Hope everybody gets at least one thing today that they can use to kind of take and improve their retirement. I do like to start off the show every week with a summary about what I saw happening in the market. This is a pretty incredible time frame for the market this week. We've had all kinds of different things happen. And, at the beginning of the year, I remember thinking to myself that 2022 was a year where there was more cross currents and possibilities for what could happen with the market than I'd ever seen in my 35-year career. We had a pandemic, which obviously we don't have very often, but it was causing, all kinds of different issues with supply chain disruptions. Labor, was very tight, and people weren't coming out of the home to take jobs or retiring early, because of the pandemic. And we had this scenario where really demand jumped dramatically, especially for goods and not so much for services. So people that used to spend money on travel and such were spending money on goods, and that exaggerated this inflationary environment that we were in, combined with people were, saving more just in general, plus the stimulus money was coming out. Get this high inflation. End of the year, the Federal Reserve pivots, starts getting very aggressive in their conversations about how they're going to fight inflation. Market struggles in that environment usually. And then throw in the fact that it's a midterm year, which is always an interesting year, actually. The average rate of return in the first half of the year is much lower on long term than the average return in the second half of the year. So all of these things going on. And then this week, of course, we had some really big movement from the Russia-Ukraine situation. Most of what we've seen in the stock market happened this week was because of that. We had one day where they were talking about they were pulling back troops. The market jumped quite nicely, and then right thereafter we heard that really that maybe wasn't true, that the attacks were more imminent and the market has been pulling back. And so I suspect that situation in Russia and Ukraine won't resolve itself immediately. We'll continue to see tensions there. If there is an invasion there, the market probably drops. Just looking historically at what happened with the two desert storms and Afghanistan and those types of things, the market drops right away. Oil prices probably come up because of the worry about Russia's, oil production being cut off or cut down, and all these different things that happen. However, at least at the moment, my outlook on that is that could be a buying opportunity, just because what we've seen in the past is the market jumps back pretty quickly. Even if oil goes up, there are other producers out there that might want to produce at a higher rate and bring down the price of oil. And I do think it's very interesting that this week the price of oil came down, which has not happened very often, even in the face of all these tensions. I suppose that's partly because there might be some other producers that are getting ready to produce more oil in case there is an invasion and a cutoff. So all kinds of these are just the wild currents that are going on. And I think what's very fascinating, though, after all of this stuff that's happening, the S&P 500, as we sit right now, is down about 9% for the year, which isn't great, but that's actually a fairly normal dip in almost any environment outside of what we're dealing with even today. We've had 84 5 to 10% drops in the market on the S&P 500 going back to World War II. So that's more than one a year. So these are fairly common. This is what happens. Now, I suspect this is going to get worse, especially if there is an invasion as far as that goes. And so then we have to take a look at really, is this a downturn that we should be super concerned about or not? And one of the key dividers for me is whether or not we're having a recession combined with this downturn or not. Because the average rate of return drop for the stock market without a recession on the S&P is negative 15%. And the average drop on the S&P 500 with a recession is negative 36%. And the recovery time is a lot longer when there's a recession. So at the moment, I'm not seeing recessionary issues happen. And we're watching. And I think one of the reasons the market's only down 9% so far is because of the fact that we're seeing this, earnings come through that are fantastic. 7 quarters in a row where these companies have outdone the expectations for earnings. And so essentially what that means is right now, as we sit, Wall Street is probably underestimating yet again the earnings potential for the companies that are out there that will be reporting it for the next quarter. And so that's the part that's driving things up. You got Ukraine and this inflationary situation that are kind of driving things down. And we're down 9%, and probably rightfully so. We've had a heck of a run coming into this, so it's not to be unexpected. And so having said that, one of the key issues I follow is the leading economic indicators. So that report just came out today for the January month, and it was down 0.3%. And so in my studies historically, looking back, I have found that it needs to be down at least 1% before we should really be worrying. And at the same time, we need to see the 200-day moving average on the S&P 500 also coming down. So it's down 0.3. And the last time it was down was February, and probably don't recall this, but and the market's up a fair amount since last February. This was last February, sorry, February 2021. So at the moment, I'm not too concerned about that. And actually, if you dig into the report, there's 10 pieces of the leading economic indicator. 6 of them were up and 4 of them were down. And the 4 that were down were kind of interesting. The first one that dragged down the indicator the most was first-time unemployment claims. So they use an inverse of that. So basically what they're saying is that when first-time unemployment claims drop a lot, we're towards the end of a cycle. And that's why they use that as a leading indicator. But we're in the middle of a pandemic. And so they've got this tight job market right now with all these job openings and all this demand coming. And so people aren't laying people off as much. And I don't know that this is the end of a cycle as far as that goes. So that's a little suspicious. Then the second biggest drag on the leading indicator index was the surveys, the sentiment surveys from consumers. What do they feel about the business environment right now? We're in a hyper partisan environment right now, so I'd be a little suspicious of those surveys anyway, especially if we consider what they're doing with their actual money. So their retail sales came out this week up 3.8% in the month of January. That's a fantastic number. So they're answering the survey negative, right? And spending money. Generally speaking, personally, I'd rather follow the money, at least in that regards, at least somewhat so. The other thing that we found today, actually, the house sales jumped 6.7% in January, which again is a big jump. So people that are super afraid about the business environment are probably not spending money at retailers at that high level, plus buying homes and things. So, we'll see what happens with that. That leading economic indicators is very important to me. We'll see how that goes, but we're still not, at a point where I think we're in a recessionary environment. There's lots of possible things that can cause a recession. The Federal Reserve could overraise rates. The situation in Ukraine and Russia could cause some kind of a contagion and situation in Europe that eventually causes a recession on a global basis. There's lots of probabilities. There always is. There's always the possibility of recessions coming from all kinds of different situations. But investing is sort of a betting game, and when you're betting, you're really looking at probabilities. And so, in my opinion, the probability of a recession happening here, even in the next couple of years, is quite low. Now that can change. It depends really, to me, it depends more on what happens with the Federal Reserve and what they actually do. But I like what I'm hearing from them. We have one Fed governor running around talking about raising rates like mad, doing all kinds of things. But all the other Fed governors seem to be taking a much more measured approach, which I think is necessary, especially with this Russia-Ukraine situation that we're dealing with. And so altogether, if we do not have a recession, these particular dips are buying opportunities. They're chances to rebalance portfolios and capture some of that low part because they are just dips, and then the market comes back up and you're happy you did those. So that's still the strategy until proven otherwise. I tend to invest in the market that we're in, whether in an up market, sideways market, or down market. I define those differently than most. I define a sideways market when the 200-day moving average starts to flatten out, which it has, and the leading indicators are still going up. That's a sideways market, and you can kind of see that it's churning up and down. And so that's when you want to rebalance and do these different dip buying. A down market for me is when that 200-day moving average starts down and the leading indicators are down 1%. Then you want to get defensive and you want to, maybe pull stocks out of the market or buy stocks that are more conservative that do generally better in downturns, those types of things. So I want to stick with, and I will stick with, what we're dealing with now. Here's the pattern. Here's how we deal with it. Here's how we go forward. So I think there's opportunity here. Again, until told otherwise, I don't get afraid of all of these things. I look at this as opportunity, chances to buy. I happen to like semiconductors. I think they're coming. They're in everything now. They're just going to be more and more need for them. Pandemic has created a shortage. These companies are going to make great money on their product for, I think, a long time. And if you're going to drop the price of the shares on average by 14% or something, I want to buy more because I think at some point in time that will pay off and I'll make some money on that. So anyway, mostly though, you want to stay very broad based here because again, all of these different trends that are coming at us, it's hard to tell what's going to do well. Is energy going to do well? Is it not going to do well? Is it value? Is it growth? Is it tech stocks? Is it, small cap, large cap, mid cap? I think it's incredibly difficult in this environment to really tell what's going to work. So keep basically exposure to everything. Don't give up on the stock market until things really start to come in terms of a recession, which again, I don't see happening right now. So anyway, that's what's happening this week. Love to be able to kind of cover these things with you and hope that you gain something from this, at least from some of my insight. And look forward to talking to you next week. I won't be doing the show next week, but I will be doing the summary on Friday. So we'll cover that then. Thank you. All right. So how's it going, Eason? Let's let's cover some of these questions.
Sure. So the first question is, if I want to retire before 60, should I handle my savings for retirement differently than if I was going to retire at a more common age, like 65?
Okay. Yeah. So it depends. Again, it really depends on the outflows and whatnot that's going on. If you're younger than 59 and a half and you're going to retire, we got to deal with, the penalties on these IRAs. And really, the way that we go through this, as you know, I mean, we gather the data, we find out the goals, we find out, what somebody's trying to spend, what other income sources they have coming in, and we go through a financial planning process using Monte Carlo simulation that really tells us what somebody should have, right? So that's the starting spot. And, how much stock, how much bond, what do they need to do? And then essentially they're, able to then put in their own desires for their own risk tolerance, and we kind of go from there. So, yeah, I think it makes some difference, but there's no like blanket answer. It really is more custom to each person.
Yeah, a common thing we see is having some money outside your retirement accounts. So like kind of like a bridge account.
Yeah.
Because the only way to access your money if it's in a retirement account is 72T.
Yep.
And the only issue with the 72T is that once you lock into that 72T, you're stuck with it until you're, I think it's 5 years
5 years. Yeah.
or so there's no change in your payments. So if you get that wrong, you're going to have a lot of issues.
Could be more than 5 years. It's 59 and a half or 60. I can't remember. It's one of those two. I think it's 59 and a half or 5 years, whichever is longer. So if you actually retire at this is what's called the rule of 72T. It's a way of getting money out of your IRAs without having to pay the penalty. Even though you're not 59 and a half yet, you can use this rule, but it has restrictions. And so you have to take it out for at least 5 years or until you turn 50, 59 and a half. Yeah, that's exactly right. So ideally, if you have time and you're going to retire before that, you'd want to build up some assets outside of those accounts, like you say, as a bridge, just to kind of get through that time frame. I'm a big believer that you should build up assets outside of your retirement plans anyway, just because there's all kinds of different tax issues and liquidity issues that come into play. And I've seen clients that have a better balance, seem to have a better retirement as far as that goes too. So I don't think there's enough attention paid to trying to achieve a balance. And you'd probably want to pay even more attention to that if you were retiring early, before 59 and a half, especially.
So this is this is a question that we've seen a couple times. Both my husband and I work. Should we be saving equally into our 401ks, or should we be, putting more, maxing out one? Kind of, how do we break down where to save our money between the two of us?
Yeah, that's pretty interesting because I mean, there's a whole bunch of different pieces that you look at, right? So work, I'm a couple and we've got both earnings. We have two 401ks. Is there some way to kind of maximize that? Should I be adding more to one or the other or putting them out equally, right? So um, I would say that one of the things that's fairly critical in my experience, because I have these strategy sessions with my clients, years after year after year, and the couple dynamic is really important. And I think that might trump the math, right? We'll talk about the math in a minute, but I think it is important to consider, how each of you would look at that scenario. So if one of you is getting all the 401k money and the other one's not because the math says that you should, does that work for you as a couple? So I think that's the first thing you have to answer. And every couple's different. They're going to have different answers to that as far as I'm concerned. But you could make some argument. It just depends on how much money each person is making, because you don't have to pay for Social Security tax, the FICA tax. I forgot what the cutoff is now. It's around 140,000.
Yeah, something around that.
Yeah. So, I mean, if one person's making 400,000 and the other person is making, 100,000, um, it could make some sense to actually maximize out the 100,000 person, still same amount of savings, that you're doing, let's say that you have available, and maybe not as much to the 400,000 because then that gets that income above that faster and it gets you, paying less Social Security tax. I'm not even sure if that actually works. The logistics of that are a little bit, that's more of a tax question as far as that goes. But there are some pieces that you could look at from a, optimizing standpoint. I've yet to see those really be put into play very often. I've much more seen it put out as an equal distribution between them, or at least a percentage basis. So, if somebody make 100, you'd have a percent there. If I make 400, you have a percent there. So there, you can make an argument for that too. But um, in the real world, and this is, I think one of the things that does concern people sometimes is what if our relationship doesn't happen? How do I protect myself? And if my husband or wife is putting all the money that we have into 401k and I'm not getting any in my 401k, maybe that'll be a problem in a divorce. Most people don't think that way, to be honest, but it does come up sometimes, actually. But one thing that have happened is I've had to deal with some divorces, and it isn't a big problem because they have a thing called the Quadro that stands for Qualified Retirement. Forgotten some distribution methodology, and it allows somebody in a divorce to take and move money out of, say, one 401k into another, and to split it up evenly. Let's say the total assets was 800,000, there was 600,000 in one and 200,000 in the other. You could move 200 from the big one to the little one. Both have 400,000, and you're dissolving the marriage with an equal amount of money in retirement plans. There's all kinds of other assets that might be out there to complicate that, but just let you know that you are allowed to do that without any tax in a divorce situation, and that's what this quadro rule does. And we've had to do that a few times within the practice, but luckily we don't actually deal with many divorces. We have a lot of pretty solid relationships, but it is something sometimes people think about.
Yeah, so I think for me, the first thing is, are you maxing out any kind of match or any kind of
Yeah,
bonus money that's coming into that?
yeah,
So if one person has to save more money because they have a better match, go for that because that's a guaranteed
yeah,
return.
yeah,
But other than that, you're getting to the point where you're kind of optimizing for the point of optimizing, but
yeah.
in the long run, it's not gonna make or break you, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, if your spouse works at a company that's getting 100% match for some crazy reason, and you're getting a match on the first, 3%, that's a big differential. You'd want to maximize yours and get that 3%. But no, I'd probably be pretty interested in putting as much as I could in that spouse, and because that's money to both of us, right? And yeah, you're right. I mean, there are situations like that where it really, because you're exactly right. If it's 100% rate of return on that money immediately, that's hard to get. So that's pretty good. That's a good point.
So our next question is, what are the like three buckets of money and why is it important to have a little bit of all of them?
Yeah, so this has come up a few times because we've talked about it a few times, and so it keeps coming back around as I think a really good question. So the three buckets of money, as far as I'm concerned, are kind of taxable assets. Money you might have in a brokerage account, individual account, whatever you want to call it. Everybody's got different names for them, but just means that if you make a change inside that account, it's taxable, and it can be a long-term capital gain if held long enough, right? And then you've got really tax deferred accounts, which would be like a traditional IRA or a 401k at work, or and 403bs if you're nonprofit, 457s if you're at a municipality. There's quite a few of these different pieces that you can set up. And that grows tax deferred, just means you don't have to pay taxes on it until you withdraw it. As you add money to it, you usually get a write off. That money doesn't end up on your tax return. So, those have some advantages. And then the last one is kind of a tax free growth. And specifically, what I'm thinking about there is the Roth IRA or the Roth 401k. And so, those you do not get a write off when you put the money in. So, you have to pay taxes on it first before it goes in. And then, but it does grow tax free, for the rest of your life as far as that goes. And so I think the advantages of having some balance amongst all three, there's a whole bunch of issues. Having more taxable money gives you the advantage to have more liquidity because some of that money you've already paid taxes on. So if you need money to live off in retirement, you might be able to get at some of that without any tax because you paid tax on it a long time ago. And then any gains that you have are taxed at capital gains rates if you've held on to it for more than a year. And that can often be lower, well, that is lower than ordinary income taxes for each person. So it's cheaper tax wise. And so it just gives you the capability. Somebody says to me, "Hey, I got $100,000 left on my mortgage. I really want to pay it off." And I look at their assets, and they don't have anything but a giant IRA, tax deferred account. And so taking 100,000 out to pay out the mortgage, you're gonna have to take out a huge dollar amount, maybe 175,000. It depends on their other incomes. And so you're going to lose all this money to pay off the mortgage versus if I had that in taxable account, I could take that out and maybe pay off that mortgage, satisfy that need, and have a lot lower taxes because part of that is going to be, already tax money and part of that is long-term capital gain. So that's the advantage of taxable. Tax deferred, you get the write off, which is great, saves you money now, which is good. And it grows, tax deferred means that you can move stuff around. So we're more active in our tax deferred accounts, for example, because we don't have to put it on the tax return until you pull money out, right? Um, Disadvantage of tax deferred is that there is a required minimum distribution at 72. And I know a lot of people don't pay a lot of attention to that, but I do have clients that are now having to do that, that are now, 75, 80, 85, that have these big tax deferred accounts and they're having to pull a lot of money out. And it's causing them, especially single clients, to pay a lot more money for their Medicare. You can end up paying 2, 3 times more for Medicare on top of being in a higher tax bracket. So that can be really unwieldy. And it is the one big asset I see all the time is all of this money in this tax deferred arena. And I think people get carried away with that. And so then tax free, like a Roth, of course, if I can make 10% tax deferred versus 10% tax free, well, that's a huge differential. So pay no tax on it, have a lot of liquidity, can use that at any point in time, pull money out of it without having to pay any taxes. It's a really, really powerful assets from flexibility standpoint, but also there's no required minimum distribution at this point. So, you don't have to take any money out. And that's a great asset to let beneficiaries inherit because they can keep it tax free, maybe for life, depending on the beneficiary, or 10 years, again, depending on the beneficiary. That's much better than letting your kids, say, for example, inherit your giant IRA that they're going to have to take out over 10 years and they're going to get killed on taxes for that 10-year period. So all of those have pros and cons. And so one of the reasons to even keep tax deferred at all is because they might change the rules around the tax-free side, right? So what you're doing there is you're diversifying the tax buckets, long-term capital gains, ordinary capital gains, tax-free, right? All three of those are different tax treatments. If they change the rules, you have a distribution amongst those three. That seems very good to me, right? I mean, again, I'm on the other side of this. My average client's 74. I'm dealing with these distributions. I'm watching what happens. I'm seeing how this works, and I'm seeing situations that are working better than others. And so having those three buckets filled, adequately, I think is a great thing. And so if you're heading into retirement, pay attention because this isn't something you're going to really notice as a problem until it's too late. When you're 75, 80, 85, all of a sudden you realize, oh man, I put everything I had into that 401k. I probably should have put some money in taxable or put some money in the Roth 401k or something along those lines and trying to even this out because now I'm getting hammered with this requirement of distribution. So that tax time bomb is something people just aren't aware of. And that's what we're trying to talk about here.
Yeah, and it's a lot of the issues with Roth is it wasn't available for a lot of
That's
people.
right. Yep.
Your income when they were introduced, maybe your income was too much,
Yep.
or
Yep.
your company doesn't have a Roth 401k. It's
That's right.
like becoming kind of common as
Yep.
now, but
Yeah.
when you're saving, maybe it's not around.
That's right. Yeah. The current group of 75, 80, 85 year olds, they didn't have a choice. They didn't have a Roth. They do have a choice now and maybe even right after retirement to do some conversions, but a lot of people don't know how that works. And now more and more people are getting more education about that. We talk about it constantly. It doesn't work for everybody, but it works for a lot of people. And you're exactly right, they didn't have the options to put money into a Roth, for example. They probably did have the options of building up some taxable assets that probably should have happened, maybe splitting a little bit of what they were saving into their 401k into something that was just a regular account. That could have happened, and a lot of people did. But those types of things, I think it's important for people to realize that there are three buckets and that there's some advantages to filling out all three. Um, yeah, it's an interesting conundrum. I will say though, I've had a lot of conversations recently with people that do have Roth 401ks they didn't even know what it was. So that's what this is about. This show is to design people to have better retirements. Go ask your company if you have a Roth 401k and consider what you should be doing there with your contribution, whether you should be adding some or all of your contribution to the Roth side of the 401k instead of the traditional side. And again, you and I have had those conversations with some of these clients, and they just don't know it exists. And so they go ask, and it's become more common. It's not everywhere, but if it is, it's worth looking into.
Yeah, and that kind of leads us into our next question. What other services does retirement capital strategy offer outside of like just investment advice?
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the key things here. In the investment advice arena, I try my hardest to, exceed what somebody could do just going to Vanguard and buying these big indexes. I use these big indexes, but I use some pieces outside of those to try to enhance returns and try to actually pay for our fee. But ultimately, one of the things that we do is just try to help, kind of like a financial partner for each one of our clients, to be able to be a resource. I mean, we do what you can tell if you watch this channel and you look at this channel, we're huge on education, and we really believe that's a piece of what we do. And so we have these strategy sessions as needed, with the clients, and we go through and take a look at their Monte Carlo simulation, what's changed in their plan. Not everybody does this, but most of our clients do. And so that really helps because it's like an early warning system to be able to tell you, hey, here's, something that's coming. Of course, we are a custom shop, a boutique, investment shop with a really tight clientele. And so we take care of everything that we can. All of the issues that happen with accounts, somebody passes away, the beneficiaries, the name changes, the new trust that comes out, all of the trading. I mean, we take care of everything that we can possibly take care of to try to make, the client's life easier. Those people that might want to do it themselves, they're having to do a lot of that on their own. We take care of that for them as far as that goes. So, uh, we've been working on, life insurance plans for people where it's appropriate, young families trying to, really work towards helping people make sure they have the right amount of life insurance. So we look at estate planning needs for those bigger estates, and we do estate plans for that to try to figure out what we can do to reduce estate taxes. So I'm sure there's some others I'm missing, Ethan. What else do we have on the list there?
Well, we have Roth conversion and tax planning. Those kind of
Uh,
go hand in hand. And
yeah,
so just being able to find a way that over time we can lower your taxes. Because a lot of times when you prepare taxes, you're thinking for this year, what can I do to lower my taxes?
right,
But there's no long-term strategy that
right,
you have.
right. Yeah, and you can make bigger impacts, in my opinion, by looking at the rest of your life tax strategies, because that every year it works. And you're right, the Roth is a big one that I missed, because I really consider us specialists in Roth conversions. We have some really powerful tools that we can use to determine what's the best tax bracket to fill, how do they work, what would happen to your net worth if you did it or you didn't do it. I think we have some great things that we can show strategy wise. We spend a lot of time helping people with their Roth conversions every single year. We're working on that. So I think that's a huge one, and maybe one of the biggest payoffs to what, to working with us. I would think that's one of the big pieces for those people that need it. Um, yeah, so but I get questions about almost anything, hey, should I lease this or buy this, car? Should I, can I buy this car or this, RV or this, travel trailer or whatever it might be? And I can go in, to their plan, put that expense in, run the Monte Carlo simulation and tell them the difference and say, give them my opinion. Yeah, that works. Or, oh boy, that really kicks back your probability of success. That would be possibly a dangerous move. I think it's really helpful personally just to know that you can and what you should do. Hey, I want to buy a rental property. Okay, let's model that, see what happens, and what are the parameters, and how does that work, or what have you. So, and what type of danger are you putting yourself in, or is it just a really good thing? That type of thing, whatever that question is. So, constantly getting questions through email that we answer. It's just nice. It's a resource, man, just to be able to ask Tom, basically, right? And so that I think that's a big piece of what we do there too, and just kind of bring some people some peace of mind.
Yeah. So this is a question that you kind of highlight or just previous reference. Should I be buying my retirement house now when I'm 10 years outside of my retirement goal?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I've seen it a lot. I've seen a lot of clients that have purchased their retirement home in advance of actual retirement for a variety of different reasons. Sometimes they're just, on vacation and they like that area, decide, hey, this is where we want to live or whatever it is, and they end up coming home after purchasing a home and such too. Um, for the most part, what I have seen is that it's worked out okay, as far as that goes. So I think it's okay. I don't know that it's needed per se. I guess the one thing I would wonder about is that, if you really felt like prices were going up and up and up and up um, in the area that you're trying to go, and then you might be able to benefit from that by buying it early, right? At the same time, can you afford to, how much are you stretching yourself financially during that 10-year period? Are you going to have less of a life because you're making a payment on this? Did you pull money? Where's the money coming from? Is it taxable? So, you have to answer the question of really, does that make financial sense to buy, considering that you still own, the house that you're in because you're still working and still need that home. Um, and so there's some parameters there, but I have seen it done, and it seems like it's worked out for the situations I've seen.
Yeah, it just what I was taught in like my certified financial planning classes that you shouldn't encourage people to buy retirement houses because people tend to regret it in the sense that, what I want now versus what I want 10 years from now could be vastly different. And locking someone into a large purchase for 10 plus years is for retirement specifically, a vacation home could be a very bad idea. If you're like also thinking of this maybe as an investment property first and then possibly a retirement home or a vacation home, then it could be actually an okay idea. But
Mhm.
purely a vacation home, you can change your mind in 10 years. So it could
Yeah.
be rough.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I have seen that a couple times also, where somebody has a piece of property, and maybe a medical situation happened, and they realize that that place that they purchased doesn't have the right medical facilities around it. And so they're staying where they are now because they can get to medical, or like you say, they just, what 10 years ago, what looked, what looked like something they would really want to own, isn't a place they really want to live today. So I would say a vast majority of the people do those types of moves at retirement. I mean, I had a client last year sold here, moved to Arizona, and they're really happy with it. They spent a lot of time looking and looking and thinking and researching, and it's really worked out well. They're super happy, and so, it's not the norm to do it early. So that's something to think about because sometimes the norms are there for a reason and they tend to work. So yeah, it's a good question. It's a good conundrum. Like I say, I've seen people do it. I've seen it work out. I can see why they would think that could be a big regret, or at least on a survey basis, why it is a big regret.
Yeah. But like if you're searching, maybe you spend those 10 years, doing vacations at different,
Mm-hmm.
locations, stay in an Airbnb instead of a
Mm-hmm.
hotel where you can actually be in that kind of community so you
Yeah.
get a better feel of what you're actually doing. Because a lot of times on a vacation, sometimes you don't fully get to know a place till you're actually there.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So our next question is, what kind of accounts can I regularly put money into for retirement?
Oh, okay. Well, there's probably some pieces of that would be interesting to know in terms of just when you say for retirement, most people think about I guess what I call traditional retirement accounts, like a 401k, a 403b, an IRA, a Roth IRA, you know. But when I think about where I can put money or what types of accounts I could use, um, for retirement, I think about the three buckets, the taxable account, the tax deferred accounts, and then the tax free accounts. And so it's an interesting question. I would want to fill and kind of make sure I have money in all three of those buckets if at all possible. I think that's very powerful. But in that tax deferred bucket is where you really have the most options. I know you were working on a case recently with a small business owner trying to, spell out all the different options, that are available to a small business owner in that pure retirement tax deferred type of account. I mean, what did you find? What were some of the options that were available there?
So you have probably like four, I would say. You have your solo 401k, a SEP IRA, which is a simplified employee pension IRA. You have a simple IRA too, and then you have the straight regular 401k, which is kind of
Mhm.
like the four options for a small business.
Yeah.
Solos are set up essentially for when you're a self-employed person with and
Yep.
you have no employees.
Yep.
SEP IRA is when you want to have a plan, but you want to be the person the business wants to contribute rather than the employees.
Yep.
Simple IRA is where the employees can defer, but the business will have to do a small match or kind of like an automatic contribution, but the limits are below what a 401k has. And then
Got
a
it.
401k has the most flexibility, but it can be the more complex and more costly plan. So it
Yeah.
really depends on your business. So
Yeah.
those are the options just in your kind of deferred space for a small business.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the questions that I would ask whoever asked that question is, what's your situation? Are you employed at a company? What are the options within that company? Do they have a Roth 401k? Do they have a regular 401k? Are they doing a simple IRA? Do they have nothing? If they have nothing, then you can still do an IRA, for example. And depending on your income limits, you might be able to do a Roth 401, a Roth IRA contribution. So, there's all these different parameters. If you're at a nonprofit, they often use what's called a 403b. If you're at a municipality, they use mostly what's called a 457, although there are a whole bunch of different pieces inside the municipality world too. It's kind of interesting. So yeah, there's actually a fair number of different places that are available for most people. There's something you can put into that tax deferred bucket, and for less, but for a lot of people, there's still places to put into that tax-free bucket, which I think is important. But don't ignore the taxable bucket, regardless if you're getting ready for retirement. Having some liquid assets outside of these retirement plans has some advantages, and disadvantages too. But that's true with all of them. When you get all three together, I think the overall advantages are at the highest level. So. Yeah, it's a good question as far as that goes.
Yeah. And our next question is kind of about, with the market being so volatile, should I be worried about keeping money in the stock market after I retire?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, actually. The way that we would answer it is pretty straightforward. We would go in and create the financial plan. We would find out all of the money outflows that somebody thinks they need, going forward. We would take a look at the assets that they do have in total, and then what other incomes are coming in from outside, like Social Security or pensions and those types of things. And we can use Monte Carlo simulation and run different types of portfolios. So you could say, okay, what if I had no stock? What's my probability of success? What if I had 50% stock or 80% stock? And you can run these and find the probability of success. I remember very specifically a case with a lady that came to a seminar. This was way back, probably 20 years ago. Uh, she came in to see me. She had never invested anything ever. She really liked the banks. She had $1 million in CDs and savings and checking and those type of things. My first thought when I was talking to her is like, wow, I mean, she was probably about 67. I was thinking to myself, that could be a lot of money if it was invested in the market, over a long period of time. But the more I got to know her, she was very comfortable. She was very happy with what was happening there. And she had a very, very reasonable standard of living. At that time, I'm going to make these numbers up because I don't remember everything, but it was roughly 40,000 a year she was spending. And she had $25,000 coming in from Social Security. So the amount of money she needed to supplement her lifestyle was 15,000. Now, she's going to need more and more and more over time, right? Because Social Security probably won't keep up and inflation's going to grow. And so, but I'm telling you, on $1 million sitting in cash, even if she just withdrew principal, she probably wasn't going to run out of money, and she was quite happy. So, having said that, you could get the same situation with somebody who needs $100,000 instead of 40, and they're going to run out of money pretty quickly because they have so much money need to make their lifestyle work. And so that person, that $1 million, needs probably more stock market exposure just to keep up with that expenditure and the inflation you might have. We can tell that from Monte Carlo simulation. So there's no blanket answer. Um, I think what happens is you kind of have this dual risk side. On one side, if you get more conservative, you get rid of the stock market risk, but you bring in the risk of running out of money because of inflation or degrading your lifestyle. On the other side, if I add more stock, I add that risk of the stock market, but I probably take down a little bit the risk of degrading my lifestyle over the long term because stocks have done a decent job long term of keeping up with inflation and beating inflation and helping people. So it's a really interesting question. It just depends on the situation. It comes up quite often, actually, as far as that goes. I think it's interesting. I had a client I just met with. They'd withdrawn about $300,000 from their account, made 250,000 in growth, and they were talking about the possibility of having more bonds instead of stock. It was roughly a 50-50 account at that time. And I said, well, the only problem is, you had a $50,000 deficit. You withdrew more than it made. And so if you go to more bonds long term, you're going to make less. And you might end up with $100,000 or $150,000 deficit. And so there's kind of that's a loss too, when it's not making enough money and you're still living at the same standard of living. And so it's a tough one to do. It's a tough question to answer, but that's how you have to look at it on both sides. If you're not withdrawing anything, then and you don't need it for a really long period of time, you can probably do almost anything with it for that matter, right? But it's most people are heading into retirement to withdraw something from their assets. Not all, but a lot. So anyway, that's our show for today. Again, we will not be here next week. Ethan and I are both taking the week off, and we will be back the following week. And really, I will still be doing the summary. I'll post that on the channel, but otherwise no show. So really look forward to, talking to you again in a couple weeks. Again, if you'd like to continue your education here, you can subscribe, hit the subscribe button, go ahead and, hit the bell. You'll get notified, when I post that summary, for example. And also you can set up an appointment with us. And just by going to our website and hitting the book appointment button and choose a half hour, phone or video conference, and we can take care of you. So I want to thank everybody very much for coming today. Really look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks. Thank you.